Well, hello, friends. I'm coming to you somewhat unfortunately again this week via video instead of live. A pastor friend in the area called me and said he and his wife have COVID, and would I be willing to preach for him on Sunday, this Sunday coming? So I said yes. And that means the schedule Sunday morning won't work. There are two services, and the early service overlaps with our Sunday school time. So I'm sorry to say, here we are via video again. So please save your questions. I'm going to answer one of them about angels here on this video because I know it was asked. But please, Jim or somebody, gather up all these questions, and next week, God willing, we'll be able to get together live again, and we can just talk through all the questions you have. This week we're gonna look at some material on demons. But before I get there was one question I think Bill asked about the possibility of humans becoming angels, and that's a pretty common idea, actually. But I think from a Christian and a scriptural point of view, that's not really possible. Human beings are created in God's image, and angels are not. Human beings have this blessing, you might say, this, in that sense, exalted status that angels do not enjoy, even though angels enjoy the presence of God, and they're close to God, and they have power and intelligence and all kinds of things. They don't bear the image of God the way humans do. So I think there's something unique about the role that humans have in God's economy that angels don't share. So that's one question about angels. I hope there are lots more. I look forward to talking to you about them. But let's go ahead and get started with this week's topic, which is on demons. I tried to pick a color here. I'm not sure why I picked this color, but somehow it seemed appropriate. And the thinking bubble on the right goes along with the subtitle, which is a beginning reflection. There's lots to talk about. We're just going to scratch the surface and get at some of the basic descriptions that we find in the Bible. We'll do some thinking together about that and kind of begin to put together some ideas toward the end. So here we go, on demons. This is the plan for my talk this time. I'll start with some basic background just on what the word means in a kind of neutral sense. Then we'll look at Old and New Testament terms. We won't look at all of them, but we'll cover the main ones. We'll look at the word Satan and what it means, and we'll see that it starts out as a title, the accuser, Ha-Satan, the Satan. And then it becomes the name of the primary enemy of God's purposes. And then we'll look at other words like elementary principles. We talked about this in Galatians a little bit, the word stoicheia in Greek, and then principalities and powers. That phrase shows up in several places. The two Greek words are there, you can see. And then I'll end with a few preliminary conclusions. So here we go, basic concepts. The original concept of demon, the Greek word daimon, is neutral. It doesn't mean something evil necessarily. As you can see, it has to do with supernatural activity, the inbreaking of supernatural activity in kind of a surprising, sometimes overpowering way. But originally, it sort of had the connotation of like an anonymous god or spirit, demon. Not necessarily positive, but also not necessarily negative. Now, the word daimon in Greek was reserved to the activity of these anonymous gods, as distinct from the personal nature of that deity, which the word theos or theia, the feminine form, theia, would be used there. So the demonic in that sense has to do with activity, with effects, with impact. It was possible for people to have a personal demon. And here we might think of something like a muse. But you can read in Greek and other mythologies that, and not just in mythology, historically, people could make reference to their personal demons, that there would be some kind of supernatural experience in their lives that they took to be revelatory, and that could come through all kinds of different media. So the idea that a demon can be personal, again, not exactly positive or negative, more neutral. Pardon me. So as I say here, this last bullet point, the word demon has to do with sudden or unexpected supernatural intervention, and it could be positive, it could be negative. Now, in the Old Testament, that sort of cultural background is very much in the Old Testament as well. And if you read the scholars on this topic, you can quickly see that they plot a kind of historical development in the concept. And that makes my sharing with you a little more fraught, a little more difficult and complicated. So I'm just going to pull out a few scriptures and try to give a little tiny hint of that historical development, but obviously I can't do much with it. So starting with that first line, the sparing use in the Old Testament, there's a range of words for demon. So, we're working with Hebrew in the Old Testament. So there's no Hebrew exact parallel to the Greek word demon, even though that's how it's translated into English. Could be false gods. We'll see animal demons. So think of birds. Think of, you can see goat demon on the screen. You can think of animals, Leviathan in the book of Job or in the Psalms. These could be references to the demonic. The demonic can be related to natural forces. So a hurricane, the whirlwind, earthquakes. These can be, natural forces can be conceived of as being somehow related to that aspect of creation that's chaotic and it's dangerous. And this gets us leaning in the direction of the demonic. So again, mixing ideas from other cultures, we see these references, and they're fairly spare. References to the demonic realm in the Old Testament are fairly spare, but we do have some. One of the reasons for the hesitance of the Old Testament is the Old Testament clearly teaches us that God as creator created everything good. So if something has existence in its essential nature, it's good. And so what do you do with the question of evil? Where do these evil spirits come from, or the demons? We'll touch on that very briefly in just a second. But the point is, the Bible wants to be clear. God is sovereignly overseeing everything. We don't have a great explanation for where the demonic comes from, but we're not talking about rival deities. There's only one God, and there are no rivals to that God. So Old Testament, a little hesitant about exploring this topic too much. But here we go. These are a few examples. Deuteronomy 32:17. They, in this case, Israel, it says, sacrifice to demons. By the way, all my references are coming from the New Revised Standard Version. So if you look at these verses in another version, you may see some other words, but they should be parallel. They sacrificed to demons. The Hebrew term for demons here is sedim. So the demons here are not God, or to deities then, as it says in the text, that they have never known. So there's a connection between deities, false gods, and demons. In Isaiah 13:21b, I'm giving you, just phrases and clauses. And the location is Babylon. There, goat demons will dance. So this has to do with the decline and fall of the nation of Israel because they've turned away from the Lord. So these Babylonian deities will dance at the destruction of God's people. Isaiah 34:14, again, goat demons shall call to each other. There too, now here's another reference to something like a demon. Lilith, personal name or a proper name, Lilith. Lilith is thought of in female terms, and there's one reference to Lilith as a bird deity, perhaps. So here it says, Lilith shall repose. In other words, these deities associated with other nations can rest because God's people have been overthrown. That's the idea. Then we see this reference in Leviticus 16, and this chapter is about the Day of Atonement. And in verse 26, it makes reference to Azazel. Again, thought of primarily as a proper name. Well, who is or what is Azazel? Again, scholars disagree about that. Azazel may be the demon living in the wilderness, and the goat, the scapegoat on the Day of Atonement, is given, as it were, to this demon, carrying the sins away from the people and putting those sins, so to speak, where they belong. But there are other possible references for Azazel that aren't necessarily about the demonic, but that's the one that's relevant to our study here. Then in Psalm 106:37, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters to the demons. And here the reference most likely is to the god Moloch. This was a well-known practice in the ancient Near East, that children would be sacrificed to this god. And that's the reference to Israel's idolatry, that Israel, in order to keep the surrounding nations appeased, you might say, would worship their deities. And apparently on rare occasion, they succumbed to the temptation to offer their children as sacrifice to this deity. And then finally, 1 Samuel 28:13, the woman said to King Saul, so King Saul seeks out this medium, you might say, because he needs a word from Samuel. Samuel is dead. The woman said to King Saul, I see a divine being. And the Hebrew term here is Elohim. So it's the word for God. The New Revised Standard translates it divine being to try to keep that clear. But divine being, is this in the realm of the demonic? Coming up out of the ground, you can read that passage and you'll see Samuel shows up. What's going on here? What kind of apparition is she seeing? But that reference to a divine being may be included in the realm of the demonic. Now, how about terms in the New Testament? The main word in the New Testament is a diminutive form of daimonion, used 60 times in the New Testament. So here's one thing we start to notice. We cannot get away. We cannot explain away. We cannot ignore the presence of the belief in this demonic realm, this aspect of reality that's a little bit outside our reach in terms of understanding the natural forces. This is supernatural. This is in the realm of the mysterious. And so again, you can see lots of references where we could look, and I'm just going to pull out a few and try to give you some kind of category examples of these words. So let's start with demons as pagan deities or gods. 1 Corinthians 10:20. What pagans sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. So you can see there, Paul saying, pagan worship is a form of sacrificing to demons. So Christians should not have fellowship in those kinds of practices. Now, this is distinct from the whole question about meat sacrificed to idols that believers might buy in the marketplace. But still, you can see where the concern starts to arise that we have to be careful about what we're getting into, because we don't want to participate in demonic sacrifice. Now, Jesus is consistently shown as an exorciser of demons in the gospel. So most prominently on this question, we see Jesus at work in his deliverance ministries. The word demons is used 36 times in the New Testament, mostly in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Interestingly, John does not really deal with the realm of the demonic. And so we get the three synoptic gospels dealing with it. So here are a couple of examples. Mark 1:32, early in the gospel, they brought to him, to Jesus, all who were sick or possessed with demons. Now, here's something to keep in mind. The Bible does distinguish between disease and demonic affliction or possession. So even in a time when modern medicine doesn't exist, medicine exists, but modern medicine doesn't. So we're like germs and things like that. They don't know about that yet, and all these things are happening to people that they couldn't pin down the cause of it, but they were savvy enough to recognize some things are just sickness, just disease, right? But these other experiences, that's a different realm. That's in the realm of the demonic. We see this in Mark 1:32, making that distinction. In Luke 8:27, a man of the city, this is Gadara or Gerasa, a man of the city who had demons met Jesus. And then in verse 30, what is your name? He says, Legion. So we see this in other gospels, right? In Mark, for example, my name is Legion, for we are many. In Mark, it's used with some overtone of the Roman legions because of the Roman imperial power has this kind of demonic quality to it. So we get that little bit of play on an idea. But we see Jesus taking on legion, and you know the outcome of that. He casts these demons into the swine. They run down the steep hill and drown themselves in the Sea of Galilee. So demons is one word used often in the New Testament. Another word that's used is unclean spirits or an unclean spirit. So it's singular or plural. Again, a couple of examples. Mark chapter 5, verse 2. Notice what I did here. In Mark, it's the same story. A man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. Same story as Luke. We are legion. Legion, for we are many. But so Mark uses the term unclean spirit, not demon, but still the same dimension, the same kind of supernatural realm. I make the point at the end of this next verse about Jesus giving authority to the apostles to cast out demons or to have authority over unclean spirits. And it's more than just the original 12 or the 11 in the case of Judas being taken out of the picture, as it were. So more than just those apostles have this power. And you might say in the tradition of the church, and I'll come to a contemporary example that I know we've talked about, but it seems so appropriate for this. I'll come back to it. But this sort of apostolic authority has continued in the church. And here we see Philip in the book of Acts, chapter 8, verse 7, for unclean spirits, crying with loud shrieks, came out of many who were possessed. So the authority of Christ over the demonic realm carries on into the apostolic community and then over time since then. So continuing with other words used in the New Testament for this demonic dimension, the word evil spirit. The Greek for evil here is poneros, right? So we have a number of different terms that relate. There's kind of a cluster of terms that can all relate to this same area. Evil spirit, pneuma, it's the same word that we would use for the Holy Spirit. But here it's evil, not unclean, but evil. So we get this little shade of meaning, this little nuance. An example of evil spirit, Matthew 12:45. Then it goes, this is a story Jesus tells about the person who's delivered, the house is clean and swept, but by implication, the owner of the house doesn't fill that house with the word of God, God's law, etc. And so these demons return. Then it goes and brings along 7 other spirits more evil than itself. Now, in verse 43, just above verse 45, Jesus uses the term unclean spirits. So here we see the parallel between evil spirits, unclean spirits. Okay, and then finally, the word spirit on occasion, rarely, is used to refer to the demonic. So Luke 9:39, suddenly a spirit seizes him, and all at once he shrieks. So these are some of the New Testament terms. If you think about where we've been now, we've got these Old Testament terms sparingly, mostly referring to the deities of other nations, and they're referred to as false gods or as demons. Natural forces and animals can represent the demonic. So again, you get a lot of ambiguity in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, it's clearer. There's a historical description for how over the centuries, especially in the intertestamental period between the Old and the New Testaments, that couple of hundred years, let's say, there's significant development in how Jews thought about the demonic realm. So the biblical view we're getting of the demonic realm is thoroughly Jewish. It's not, these are not just outside influences coming in. It is thoroughly Jewish, but it takes a while for the idea to develop, clearly developed in the New Testament. All right, let's get to Satan now. It makes me think of Saturday Night Live and Dana Carvey. The original term is Ha-Satan, the accuser. It is a title, not a proper name. So Ha-Satan, the accuser. And a classic example of the accuser is in Job. The whole story is built around this conversation that goes on between Satan. Now, in my New Revised Standard Version, it just says Satan, but there's a footnote that says the Satan or the accuser. And so this is how the story starts. One day, the heavenly beings, and the literal is sons of God. So one day, the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan, literally the Satan, the accuser, also came, excuse the spelling, also came among them. Okay, so all the way through Job, when the word Satan appears, my New Revised Standard says just Satan, but it's really the Satan. So it's a title. And that's the job of Satan in Job. He's accusing Job. He says to God, look, you've so blessed Job. If you took away all his blessings, he would then curse you. And that's part of the drama of the plot in Job. So here we have a function that I think is really important for us to remember, that Satan, along with these demons, are part of a supernatural realm. And their function is to afflict and to discourage and to harass believers. The word possess is maybe most of the time too strong, but it may feel like that in certain rare cases. So what I'm trying to get us to do is kind of warm up to the idea that some of what we experience in life may not just be material or natural always. We need to start thinking about, could our vision be a little bit bigger, and maybe could we have a little more understanding of what is happening? I'll come back to that point. But it starts here with Satan. So Satan also is a name. Only one time in the Old Testament is it used that way. 1 Chronicles 21:1. Satan, used as a name or a proper name, stood up against Israel and incited David to count the people of Israel. This has to do with the census that David takes and gets himself in trouble with God. All right. Only time in the Old Testament. Now, a few New Testament references. There are clearly more than what I'm giving you here. Remember what Jesus says when they say, these religious leaders say, almost under their breath, so to speak, by the ruler of demons, he casts out demons. And Jesus says in response, how can Satan cast out Satan? There's a logical problem there, right? If I'm doing this by the power of Satan, well, what about these other exorcists? How are they casting these people out? And why would Satan want to cast himself out when that's his job, is to afflict and accuse and cause problems? So Jesus asked this rhetorical question: how can Satan cast out Satan? In Luke 10:18, we see, I watched Satan fall from heaven excuse me. You can tell I was under some time pressure here, like a flash. So Jesus references Satan. He sends out the 70, remember, and they come back. They're talking about all the amazing things that happened. I watched Satan fall from heaven like a flash. So we get a sense there about the judgment that's coming for this demonic realm, particularly Satan. 2 Corinthians 11:14, another little angle here. Even Satan disguises him as an angel of light. Now we could think back to Genesis 3 and the story of the serpent. And if you remember what it says there with Adam and Eve, they looked on this fruit, they saw it was a delight and that it was desired to make one wise. This is a good example of Satan or the devil appearing as an angel of light. It looks so good. It looks so right. It looks so appealing. And that's part of the trickery of the demonic. And then finally, Revelation 20, verse 7, when 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from prison. So we get all these interesting, mysterious, maybe a little confusing references. What's going on in the book of Revelation, that where Satan is bound for 1,000 years, the millennium, then he's released, and then there's the final judgment and all that. We don't really know exactly how to follow that story all that well. But again, references to Satan. So we put the demonic together with Satan, and we begin to see that in the cosmology of the ancient Near East, carrying into the Greco-Roman period and the New Testament period, we have a vision of reality with Satan as kind of the ruler of darkness, and these demons are in some way under his authority. Some of you have read Screw Tape Letters, and it's a very imaginative way of thinking about the nature of sin in our lives and the possible impact that this demonic realm has over us. So we start to get a picture of a kind of hierarchy that mimics God's glory and his throne and the heavenly court, as it were. Now you can think back to the angels from our talk last week about how there's this court scene of divine beings or heavenly beings or supernatural beings, angels, whose job it is to worship and serve God. So Satan and his dominions are a parody then of the holy God. So that's something to think about in understanding the demonic realm. Now, principalities and powers are going to stretch out here a little bit. There are other places in the New Testament, especially, where we get this reference to the powers of darkness. Something's going on in the world that's mysterious. We can't explain it very well. And we find ourselves being pushed beyond just natural explanations. Something more seems to be going on here, even if we can't quite say what it is. So the New Testament uses some words like these that I've chosen here, principalities and powers. And I want to say at the beginning that there's a conceptual overlap between oppressive political powers or regimes and spiritual forces. This is one area that we could start to think a little bit more biblically, and it might open up some understanding for us. The thing I don't want to do is just blame everything on the devil. Human beings always have agency. So we are always responsible to God. And yet, sometimes to understand the cause of certain things, we have to go beyond our natural explanations, and the Bible really helps us do that. Okay, Daniel 10:13. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia opposed me 21 days. So Michael, the angel, the archangel, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. So if you read Daniel, you get this interesting mixture between political and spiritual here. What's going on? The kingdom of Persia is involved here as a political entity, but there's also some kind of spiritual warfare at work. Ephesians 1:20-21. God put this power to work in Christ when he raised him from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion. And these words, arches and exousios, These words refer to more than just political or human powers. Something else is going on. Ephesians 6:12 makes this even clearer. For our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, the archos, against the authorities, the exousios, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness. Some of you have read that book, right? What was his name? Frank Peretti. This present darkness, you see where he gets it, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Now, what Paul is not doing is this is not dualism where there's a spiritual realm and there's a physical realm, and our job is to get back to the spiritual realm. What he's talking about, he's identifying spiritual forces, but they're very much a part of the world that we know now, physically, materially. There's no division. We can distinguish, we can see different characteristics, but it's all part of the same reality. Okay, last point here. These elementary principles or spirits, the Greek term stoicheia. We talked about this in Galatians, so I'm going to go back there. But remember, stoicheia can refer to something like the ABCs, the basic principles, the foundational ideas of a system of thought. Stoicheia can have a very normal kind of philosophical use or linguistic use, but it also refers to this murky realm that gets into the demonic. Here's an example from Galatians. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to beings, notice this language, that by nature are not gods. And then carrying on. How can you turn back again to the weak and beggarly? Here's where the stoicheia shows up. Weak and beggarly elemental spirits. You were enslaved to beings. Why are you turning back to these elemental spirits? This murky, mysterious dimension of reality that's more than just natural human structures and relationships. Something else is going on. This all falls into the realm of the demonic. So you put these terms together and you start to see, again, a kind of a picture emerging that sees the demonic realm as a kind of a shadow reality, but very much a part of the world we know and active in the world we know in ways that we in the West have more or less lost sight of. And so this is a good study for us just to think. And I'm not pushing any particular viewpoint here. It's just a way of kind of reacquainting ourselves with what the Bible says about this realm. All right. You may remember, I think I shared this article with you from the Atlantic a year or two ago about this rise in requests for exorcisms. So here's a contemporary example of the same kind of thing we're reading about in the Bible. And it appears to be a trend. And in 2018, in that year, more than 1,700 requests in the Indianapolis, Indiana diocese alone for exorcisms. Now, we'll get to the point a little bit further down about what's causing this, what seems to be going on now in this period of time that's making people more aware of this, again, this unknown realm that seems to be real, not natural, and yet really causing problems. So you can look at that article again. You can find it online, Google it, and you can see it. It's fascinating to read it. And it makes the point that the Roman Catholic Church is very cautious about identifying a particular case as demonic oppression or possession. So exorcists are priests in the Catholic Church with special training. And John Paul II, it continues with Francis. So more priests are being trained to do this kind of work to meet the demand. Hundreds of them, thousands of them around the world. But here's a little bit of the process they go through. The first thing they do is require a psychiatric examination, a thorough one, by a real psychiatrist. So somebody who's licensed, certified, has the credentials and the knowledge and the experience. That's the first thing they require a person to do. They require a thorough physical examination So what are they doing? They're trying to eliminate or identify, as the case may be, natural causes of this person's problems. We know about psychological illnesses. We know about schizophrenia and dissociative disorders and things like that, trying to eliminate all those. They also interview the clients, the potential clients, for a history of their experiences. And they'll ask questions like, have you dabbled in the occult? And that's why I put in parentheses there the doorway. So exorcists talk about doorways. The article makes this point about doorways. When people do things to open themselves up to occult influence, it's a way for demonic activity to get started. So doorways of demonic influence, no single cause or causal explanation, but it's noticeable that in the article it says 80% by one priest's count of people seeking exorcisms have been sexually abused. So again, we start to think, okay, for 50 plus years now, we've been increasingly sexually libertine in our society. And that's brought out into the open, and I think really increased the rate of these things, but it's certainly brought out into the open the sexual abuse going on, exploitation, sex trafficking, all that. Now, a lot of times sexual abuse is from somebody we know, a family member, a friend, the next door neighbor. I mean, it's somebody close, and that's part of the damage of sexual abuse. But anyway, in relation to these exorcisms, sexual abuse seems to be very prominent. More and more people dabbling in the occult. So again, for 50 or 60 years now, we've had this growing kind of spiritual, not religious phenomenon in the West. It makes me think of the Beatles and when they went to India to meet with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. I think I got that right. Some of you can tell me. Spiritual, not religious generations correspond with a rise in the occult, in the non-Christian supernatural. Now, the interesting thing I find about this is that with the increasing skepticism towards supernatural things from a religious point of view, so the Enlightenment, parts of it were pretty hard on what we think of as Orthodox Christianity. So this skepticism arising, kind of creating openness to consider other things. If what we think we know about Christianity really isn't true, if Jesus is nothing but a moral teacher or something else, then all that stuff we read in the Bible can't be true. Well, that leaves a vacuum. Well, what do I believe in then? What do I trust in? And so people turn and start searching. And I think this goes back to G.K. Chesterton, who said that skepticism does not lead to people believing in nothing. That's the logical end, you'd think. Skeptics don't believe in anything, but rather they come to believe possibly in anything. Ironically, everything's on the table then. If this isn't true, we've got to fill it with something. So we've got all these possibilities. And this is what's going on in the spiritual, not religious group. Which makes me think also of what John Calvin said in his Institutes. The human heart is a factory of idols. We make idols, right? So again, if we're gonna remove the one true God from the picture, we have to fill that vacuum with something. And this opens up the possibility for people to come into contact with the demonic. Okay, a few tentative conclusions as I wrap it up here. The Bible presents a unified worldview of spiritual and material. They're together, all intertwined, interrelated. So that worldview challenges our material Western assumptions. There is no clear boundary between physical or material or political or spiritual. We have to kind of broaden our thinking and grapple with this, or at least I think we should. We need to remember that God is sovereign over all. God is a God of goodness who orders. Remember the Hebrew term shalom, the Greek word irenic, right? Peace means everything properly ordered, everything in relation to everything else according to the way God envisions it. And God is sovereign over all, a God who is good and who orders things good. So the vision is a well-ordered, peaceful world. In contrast, then, evil spirits and demons and Satan act in opposition to God's good ordering. So the basic problem we have with demons and Satan is chaos, the tendency toward disorder and confusion and trouble and animosity and hostility. So when you start looking at the mystery of sin in the Bible, you can see how, although we are still responsible because we don't lose our ability to choose, right? We can say yes to God or no to God. So we remain responsible, but still these influences go in the direction of chaos and disorder. However, evil spirits, though they are real, exist under God's sovereign ordering. They are, in some sense, permitted to act, but they are not opposite and equal forces to God. Now, this fact creates difficulties. And as I alluded to with the Old Testament, how do we make sense of this? If God is really in control, why does he let all these terrible things happen through this demonic realm? And by the way, where do they come from? That's the next point. The Bible doesn't say. The one place where some people think they see Satan is in Isaiah 14, because there's reference to Lucifer as the son of the dawn, and he's one of the most beautiful of angels, and he falls from heaven and all that. Most scholars believe that's actually a reference to the king of Babylon. So it's kind of metaphorical language for a political reality. But as I have said, we don't want to separate out politics and spiritual as much as we typically do. There may be something there. You take a look at Isaiah 14 and see what you think. Okay, to be clear then, God did not create evil spirits as evil. This would be to go against God's holy and good nature. Where do they come from? They've got to be part of creation. So this is why people posit some kind of rebellion, some kind of angelic rebellion led by the devil, Lucifer, who becomes known as Satan, some sort of rebellion, and God kicks him out of his presence. And so these fallen angels become the demons. I mean, that makes sense, right? You've got to have some kind of answer here, even though we hold that answer loosely. Next, God empowers believers to resist evil, the devil, and the demonic. And I think of these two verses here, 1 Peter 5, 8, and 9. Like a roaring lion, your adversary, the devil, prowls around looking for someone to devour. Resist him, steadfast in your faith. We can resist the demonic influences in the world by grace. The grace of God is given to us. The work of the Spirit in our lives, we can resist. We don't have to be passive victims to the demonic. And then that's what James 4 says, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Well, there's a lot of stuff. Sorry. Hope you find that interesting. I hope you find it informative. I hope it stirs up lots of questions. So when we get together next week, we can talk about both angels and demons, and I will do my best to answer any questions you might have. But I hope this stimulates some thought. And for all of us, may we continue to grow in grace and the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. See you next week.